Hello everyone, welcome to my Last of Us Remastered, grounded difficulty, no damage, no crafting, no upgrades, no safes, no Shiv doors, no training manuals walkthrough, and this is Colorado. And we have just picked up the flamethrower, which is a weapon that is absolutely pointless in The Last of Us Part 1, but it actually has utility in The Last of Us Part 2. I don't even know why I waste time trying to pick up the flamethrower in this game. There's never any moment where you need the flamethrower, and you get such little ammunition for it. The maximum amount of ammo you're ever going to get with the flamethrower is probably like 25. Maybe even more if you get flamethrower fuel from the tunnel area of Salt Lake City. Because you do get flamethrower fuel in one particular area of that encounter. But it's all completely pointless in the end, because you can get the rest of Salt Lake City done without ever having to fire your weapons. So, in actuality, there's no utility for the flamethrower whatsoever, whereas in The Last of Us Part 2, the flamethrower was especially handy against the Rat King, and it could be useful against other infected. The game even specifies that the flamethrower is especially powerful against infected enemies. And not only that, but the flamethrower in the second Last of Us had a lot more range compared to the first Last of Us's flamethrower. So, you were able to keep more of a distance away from the enemies, and it was especially handy when it came to dealing with them. But even still, though, it still doesn't change the fact that the flamethrower didn't really have that many applications in the second Last of Us, so the flamethrower doesn't really get any kind of kind treatment from the game when it comes to its utilities, and it's very unfortunate. But keeping that in mind, just don't bother picking up the flamethrower in the first Last of Us. It's completely pointless. But this first part of Colorado, where you're in the university, has a lot of downtime that I've had to trim out. And given the restrictions that I'm doing for this walkthrough, there's not a lot of opportunities for me to pick up ammunition, which is another reason why I've trimmed out a lot of the areas of the university. But there are 3 big encounters in the university area. This is one of them. It's very easy to do. Just take the path that I take, wait for the roaming runner to go to a particular part of the room, and then take a route, and then it's very easy to dispatch these enemies. I do get into a fight with the last enemy in this encounter because I thought this enemy I killed was the last enemy, so I stand up, but then it turns out she's in that corner right there, and she's going to start to come after me, but I have a machete, so I'll be able to instantly kill her. But bear in mind, when it comes to using the instant kill weapons, Joel takes quite a while to swing them, so you have to make sure you hit the enemy at the right moment very early on so that they do not get a chance to frame advantage you, because the grabs that the infected do are pretty fast. And it's the same case with the humans whenever they go to do their melee attack. You have to make sure that you time your button press properly so that they do not frame advantage you with their melee attacks. Now, this encounter right here, there is an opportunity to pick up some ammunition in these rooms over here, but it's all completely pointless, so I'm just going to stealth past all these enemies, and I'm making sure I'm aiming so that I move at my slowest speed. There is a Bloater, and the Bloater has the exact same hearing threshold as the clicker, so he's no problem whatsoever. At least in this game, the infected and the humans don't hear you while you're crouching if you get too close to them. This is different in the second Last of Us, where the enemies can hear you if you were near them while crouching. So you oftentimes had to stand still for a couple of seconds before you started moving, and that ensured that the enemies would not be able to spot you. But when you interact with this door, the enemies are going to start to come after you, but they're so far away that they can never catch up to you. And now we're on this encounter with the humans. I'm just going to use my melee weapon against these 2 enemies. They have melee weapons themselves. This guy will always drop an instant kill weapon. And then this guy, see that? He could have frame advantaged me if I mistimed my attack, but he didn't. So now I'm going to pick up that guy's hatchet, but it's all pointless in the end because there's never any need to use the instant kill weapons from this point onward. You already have the bow and arrow, and the bow and arrow is an incredibly reliable tool in this game compared to the second Last of Us. Now, when you start this next phase of the encounter, the enemies are in a combat status, but if you retreat over here and you wait them out, they will return to a stealth status, and this gives you an opportunity to use the bow and arrow to your advantage. But something important I need to discuss right now, do you notice how Joel is doing the animation where he's sharing a cover space with Ellie? Well, believe it or not, they've removed that mechanic from The Last of Us Part 2, and it is incredibly frustrating, and honestly, the dumbest decision they could have ever made with that game. It is so unbelievable that they decided to remove such a fundamental mechanic like that. The amount of times you will get your cover stolen by the AI in the second Last of Us, and you're going to notice this a lot whenever you're in the elementary school and you're fighting the WLF. It happens way more than it perhaps should, which is to say, it shouldn't happen at all. It's so dumb that they neglected that. So, to accommodate for this, you have to make sure that you are prone behind cover, because if you are not prone, the AI will steal your cover, they will push you so far back from the cover, and then the enemies will spot you. It is so unfair and bullcrap that it's designed like that. That is definitely something that the second Last of Us does very poorly compared to the first Last of Us. But that spawned just then. When you go through this doorway, you'll trigger 3 enemies. The first 2 enemies will know exactly where you are, so you need to use a bottle on the first guy, grab him, and then use him as a human shield, and then kill the second enemy while you're using him as a human shield, because he won't be able to attack you while you're holding the human shield. Then what you're going to have to do is you need to come to this general area over here and keep watch over the third enemy. There's no telling where he's going to be, but he's very omniscient. He's going to be in a suppressive state where he's going to try to walk towards you and just aim his gun at your general direction in order to try to attack you, but it's not doing him any good. So he's lost me, and now is my chance to take him out. After this guy dies, there is going to be another spawn of enemies when you get down the staircase. You have to use your revolver. There is no faster way of killing these 2 enemies. One of them has a gun, and the other one has a melee weapon. I suppose if you don't have the revolver in this case, which is honestly impossible if you've been following this walkthrough, you could use like your sniper rifle or your shotgun in order to get rid of the guy with the gun, or you can probably use a brick or a bottle, but that one is pretty risky because the brick or the bottle takes quite a while to travel to the enemy, so by the time it's traveled to him, he's probably already shot you, so just use this method right here. But don't push up too quickly, because there's a guy who's around this corner, and he's looking down the corridor right now in order to try to ambush you. So come over here and use a brick in order to stun him. And now that he's dead, you now need to do the sequence where Joel is severely injured. And with how simple the sequence is, I've decided to cut it out, even though it's definitely one of my favorite moments in the game because it really showcases how far Joel and Ellie's relationship with each other has really come throughout this journey. Although I find the beginning of this sequence a little weird because Joel is in a struggle with that enemy, but Ellie isn't doing anything, so I'm just wondering what Ellie is doing and why she's not trying to help Joel out in that moment. That's my biggest criticism with this sequence, but the rest of it is really cool. But I've now transitioned over to this hunting sequence right now, and we are currently playing as Ellie, and this is the point in the game where it starts to feel like Resident Evil 4, because the way they've implemented the mechanics exclusive to Ellie makes it feel like it's been inspired by Resident Evil 4, because Ellie can do very similar things to what Leon can do in Resident Evil 4. The biggest thing is that she has the ability to punish flinch animations with an animation. So you can pretty much shoot enemies, make them flinch, and then press square on them, and Ellie will instantly kill them. It doesn't just apply to those kind of animations as well. Ellie also has the ability to instantly kill enemies that grab onto AI partners. This is something that I really wish Joel had the ability to do in the first Last of Us, because the AI on this game is so incompetent when it comes to killing the enemies. They should at least be reliable in setting up the enemies in a position where you can easily ambush them and finish them off. Because having to play as Joel, and then just punching the enemies so many times just to punish them for trying to grab onto your AI partner is not something that I feel is rewarding. It's far more rewarding when you play as Ellie, when she has the ability to punish the enemies for trying to grab onto AI partners. And speaking of the AI partners, David, your AI partner in this upcoming section, he is the most reliable AI companion in this game, because he kills runners in 3 hits. And he also gets grabbed a lot by the enemies, so you can easily punish the enemies for trying to grab onto him. And I find that very ironic, considering that he's one of the antagonists of this game. It's so odd when you think about it like that. But I've now transitioned over to this cabin sequence, which is heavily inspired by Resident Evil 4, and I honestly feel like it's a better cabin sequence compared to Resident Evil 4's cabin sequence, because the cabin sequence on Resident Evil 4, while it was a cool idea, it just had a lot of problems, and these problems were definitely noticeable with the Plaga Type A's, because they were able to sprint during that encounter, which made no sense, and they could hit you through the geometry, and there were just so many enemies. And Lewis was very reliable in the cabin sequence, but if he killed enemies very quickly, you could easily get swarmed, and it was very problematic in that encounter. But this one, there's a lot more control, especially when your guns do so much damage on this difficulty. And I'm not saying that such sequences in The Last of Us Part 2 were bad, because they were incredibly fun as well. You know, like that restaurant holdout area when you're playing as Abby in Seattle Day 1, that was a really fun encounter. And you used a lot of Resident Evil 4 mechanics in that encounter. If you watch my walkthrough, you will definitely see a lot of Resident Evil 4 mechanics demonstrated properly in that sequence. But when you push this, the clicker's going to grab onto you, and then there's going to be a bunch of runners coming from that window over there. I'm going to try to make sure that David is being as active as he can, and whenever David punches an enemy but he doesn't kill them, I'm going to rush in for the kill, because I can punish their flinch animation with an animation. Right now, he's being grabbed, and see that? Instantly dead. It doesn't matter that the enemy is at full health, you'll be able to instantly kill them. How cool is that? And that just makes up for the fact that Ellie can't do melee combat with the enemies because she isn't very capable at this point. I mean, she develops that capability in The Last of Us Part 2, but at this point, she's just not able to attack enemies considering that she's very tiny, and she hasn't developed the kind of dexterity needed to really take on these enemies in combat. And there are a couple more enemies. Don't be afraid to let them come in through the barriers if you want to save your ammo. You'll definitely need a lot of sniper rifle ammo. I mean, I did see someone do a trick where they don't try to pick up the sniper rifle ammo, and they instead rely on the bow and arrow, because what this does is it causes the enemies to drop a lot more sniper rifle ammo than what the game is probably expecting, because the game's thinking that you need that ammo immediately because you haven't picked it up. And it's a very interesting exploit, but I tried doing it myself, and I achieved mixed results with it, so don't be too reliant upon it. But that is the end of this first phase. And then the second phase is just a stealth encounter with a bunch of clickers. That's very simple. It's definitely a pretty good time to try to get ammunition from the clickers, in case you need it. And you are able to pick up some supplies. You can also get some bricks and bottles, and watch out for that window on your right. If you get too close, you will take damage, so hug the left-hand side. And then the clicker's going to try to block the barricade, so get rid of it, and that will be the end of this. So now I'm just going to transition over to the encounters with the clickers, and this is another cool thing that Ellie has the ability to do. She can instantly kill clickers because she has a knife. And watch this. I'm standing right in front of this clicker and I'm mashing triangle, and it's allowing me to do that. I mean, you can't do that in the second Last of Us, but you can still instantly kill clickers via stealth attacks. And you can't move clickers around before killing them in the second Last of Us, seeing as how they're a stronger enemy. But you could still move them around during the stealth kill animation, so that you could be less visible to the enemies. And that's pretty cool as well, but this is incredibly powerful. And if any clicker spots you, move around the environment, because while they are kind of omniscient, they do lose you pretty quickly. So I've lost this clicker, it's coming around the corner, so I'm going to mash triangle, and be very careful when you do this, because sometimes it makes noise. I don't know what dictates whether this animation is going to make noise or not, because right there, the clicker heard it. I don't know why the clicker decided to hear it, but it's just very odd. I mean, Ellie can't really do stealth kills unless she does it against infected enemies, and she has to do it from behind, I bet. I think that's how it works. If you try doing it from the front, it seems to trigger a percentage of chance for it to actually make noise. I mean, Ellie cannot do stealth kills against humans, however. Every single animation you do against humans, it will always be classed as a strike animation, not a sneak kill. So you need to be very careful of that whenever you are playing in a section that involves humans. And you instead want to be very reliant upon your bow and arrow. Although, there is going to be a point in Colorado where you lose all your weapons, and you're only having to resort to your knife, and you need to get a weapon. But that's later on, and I'll explain that section when I get there, because it's a really fun section. And one thing I should mention about mashing triangle, Ellie is very good at doing corner kills on enemies, because she doesn't have to grab the enemy. It just immediately goes into a preset animation where she just stabs her knife into the enemy. So it's very handy for corner kills, but not very handy as a stealth kill. So that's something you gotta bear in mind when you're trying to kill enemies around corners. But the third phase is beginning right now, so there's always going to be 4 enemies in this back area over here. And I'm taking the time to use my bow and arrow so I can get more rifle ammo back. Runners will die in one hit from the bow and arrow, but clickers will not, unless you aim for the head. And then, I'm about to demonstrate something else that's really cool. So whenever the enemies are in the animation, where they are dropping down from the top level, you can stand behind them and instantly kill them. I saw somebody do this in a YouTube video, and I was so surprised. So watch this. Look at that. That is amazing. Once again, they really make Ellie feel very powerful in this game, and that's why I like to play as Ellie more so than Joel in this game, because this is where this game really feels like Resident Evil 4, and whenever a game takes influences from Resident Evil 4 for all the right reasons, it is always going to be great. Last of Us Part 2, The Evil Within, all those kind of games, they will always be great if they take influences from Resident Evil 4. You just cannot go wrong whatsoever with taking influences from Resident Evil 4. And this guy's spawning in. I'm going to finish him off. And then, don't try to be too reliant upon this, because the enemies can still attack you during these animations. and you are heavily vulnerable when you come out of the animations, so use it sparingly. And once again, David has punched that enemy and he hasn't killed it, so I can punish their flinch animation with an animation, and they're dead. So that is just amazing. I really love this part of the game so much. This is my favorite part of the game, because the combat on this part really excels. It just feels so cool, and it's why I go to a lot of these third-person shooting-based games / survival horror games, because every time a third-person shooter does something that feels very different to the standard formula, it always feels innovative compared to something that you would see in like a fighting game, for instance, because fighting games, they never really do anything very interesting. Everything they do feels very simple in their formula, and to put it in another way, while they try to feel and look different aesthetically, in the end, they don't really feel different from each other with their implementations. Like, it's hard to find a unique trait that separates one fighting game from another, whereas with Resident Evil 4, the kind of systems they introduced in Resident Evil 4 that really made it stand out from every other third-person shooting-based game out there, you know, it's something else entirely. It is out of this world. It's out of this universe with what they did with Resident Evil 4. With the kind of design choices that Resident Evil 4 embraces, it's hard to be impressed with anything other genres bring out, such as with like fighting games, as I've already explained. I mean, this isn't true to some extent, because with Resident Evil 7 is my favorite first-person game ever, and it really felt different to what you'd see normally in normal first-person shooting-based games, or any kind of first-person survival horror-based game, because the kind of designs that Resident Evil 7 embraces, they're really impressive, and I cannot wait for Resident Evil 8, just to see what Capcom does with innovating on Resident Evil 7's take on the series. But that right there is the end of this encounter, so take the time to scavenge for resources before interacting with David, and now we're going to transition over to this horse riding sequence, which, it's random as to whether you're going to take damage or not, but I think you're less likely to take damage if you take this path every time. So follow what I do in this video, and you will most likely not take any damage. I mean, you'll have to make some sharp turns here and there just to ensure that the enemies are going to miss a little easier. And see, like right there, I had to make a very sharp left turn to ensure that my angle with him was very wide, so that he wouldn't be able to hit me very easily. Same case right here. So I have to make sure I'm kind of perpendicular with that guy to ensure he doesn't hit me. And then you go under here, and I really like this quote right here. I love it when Ellie says, "Come get me, motherfuckers." It's my favorite line in this scene right here. It's much better than what she says normally, where she says, "Over here," because it doesn't provide a lot of impact on this scene. It doesn't feel like something like Ellie would normally say. So I was really happy that that made the cut for this walkthrough. But unfortunately, Callus is dead, and I'm really sad about that, because I loved Callus on this game. Callus was just nice to have around, and it was the same case with Shimmer. And I especially liked the moments where Ellie and Dina would be interacting with Shimmer. And it was very sad when Shimmer died. But now that you've done that sequence, come down here, and then we are going to be moving on to a very fun stealth encounter. And I'm going to skip most of the enemies, and I'm only going to kill one enemy. I like the environment for this section right here. I like the houses, I like the snowy environment. It's a really cool area. It just feels like a really nice place to relax and just also make it very accommodating for a stealth encounter. I also like the music that plays here. It's a very subtle beat, but it has a really nice rhythm to it. But wait for these 4 enemies to go past, and they will not try to look in any direction, because they're currently in a suppressive state, where they're just pointing their guns in a straight line, so they won't do any kind of turning animations with their heads. But right here, when you reach this threshold of the area, the enemies are completely random, so you need to be extra cautious with these enemies. So there's no telling if there's going to be an enemy on the left. There's no telling if that guy's going to go on that path like he's doing right now. And you also have to be very careful of any plants in the area, because if you interact with certain plants, they make noise, and they will alert the enemy to your position, and they'll go and investigate. So, like right here, there's a plant right near that mantle spot. You see right there? Right near that wall? Be very careful of that. So if you're planning on mantling, you need to stay on the left-hand side, so you don't interact with that plant. And then there's one guy over here, so I'm just going to take him out. And then I'm just going to sneak past this whole entire encounter. And that is the end of this encounter, but there's still more to come. You're free to use your weapons as freely as you want, because you're going to lose your weapons very quickly. And you can even get a shotgun on this part, and this is the only time Ellie ever gets a shotgun in this game. She doesn't even get a shotgun in the Left Behind DLC, which I'm definitely going to be doing a walkthrough of the Left Behind DLC. But there's going to be a lot of moments where I'm trimming a lot of the downtime, because the Left Behind DLC embraces a lot of downtime to complement the pacing. So I'm really only going to be including the moments where you're in the present. I'm not going to be including any of the moments where you're in the past. I mean, I'll include those moments in the no commentary version because I really respect what they've done with the Left Behind DLC, and the fact that the Last of Us Part 2 does take influences from the Left Behind DLC is really nice with its pacing. So I can't wait to do a walkthrough of the Left Behind DLC. But this right here is very weird. So I don't know why this happens, but the way to trigger this little glitch with Ellie's model is if you go inside the tube for the very first time, and you're holding L1 the full way, the game will get very confused, and because of that, it'll cause Ellie to go into the T-model pose that developers use to make the character. It's really hilarious. And I don't know why this only happens on the very first time you go inside the tube, because if you try to do it again, it never works. It's really odd. This is the only part of the game where this happens, only for this little sequence where you can get that weird glitch happening. I mean, there are some weird things associated with holding L1 while in these forced crouch positions. Like, when you're in Boston, there's a lot of moments where you can hold L1 during these forced crouch moments, and then when Joel gets out, he gets launched. So that effectively serves as a speedrun strategy that will work every single time if you're trying to speedrun this game. So you can use that very easily. But here's another Sultan Counter. Once again, you're free to kill all the enemies if you want to. There's really no point. Even if it does feel logical to get rid of these enemies, considering that they're essentially coming close to killing Joel. But it's a lengthy process, so I'm just going to take the better approach, and I'm just going to wait for all the enemies to come out from that spot over there, and I'm going to use my bow on the last enemy that appears so that he's not in the way. All the enemies will pretty much go in the same general direction. There's really no encounter here. It's just a case of getting from point A to point B in a certain amount of time, and then using your bow and arrow intelligently to get rid of the last guy. And then for this part right here, once you move the dumpster, there is going to be some encounters with humans. There's one guy who's going to be outside of a window, and you need to kill him, and then after that, another guy takes his place, you kill him, and then, for some reason, you then encounter two enemies that have no weapons. I don't know why these two enemies don't have weapons, but it's a joke that it's designed like that, so get rid of this guy. The next guy is going to appear from that window over there. You'll have to be very careful with the aiming because this game has a weird aim assist function where if your reticle is anywhere near the enemy, the game kind of takes control a little bit just to help you out, but it's more so a hindrance than an actual help. You can disable this feature, thankfully, in the second Last of Us, which I already do by default. I'm never a big fan of auto-aim moments, unless the auto-aim is needed to complement very faulty game design. Or game design that really work together with the auto-aim, such as with A Plague Tale Innocence, because the auto-aim on that game is needed if you're wanting to kill enemies. But this part right here, you need to stay on the left-hand side and try to make sure this crate over here is in between yourself and the enemy so that they do not shoot you immediately when you crouch. And this is a really cool sequence. So this is a mandatory combat encounter, and as I mentioned before, the Last of Us series can't really do these mandatory combat encounters well because the AI does a lot of really weird things that are not supposed to be the case because this game is meant to be played from a stealthy perspective. But this is a big exception to this because the reputation that Joel and Ellie have built up in the minds of all these cannibals has created a new gameplay mechanic for this section where after you kill two enemies, the enemies are going to start to run away from you because they're scared of you. How cool is that? That is amazing, and it makes this mandatory combat encounter flow really nicely, and it's just so different because you don't see these kind of things in most games nowadays where you're able to use your reputation that you built up to essentially incite fear into the enemies. It's essentially a morale system implemented for the enemies for this section. It's so unique and really cool, and I really like that moment just then. And then we have this town sequence with Ellie where we have no weapons and we only have our knife. And this is the way you do it on the very first instance of starting this encounter. So when you restart the checkpoint, it's always going to put you here and the patterns are going to be completely different. When you do this on the very first instance, this strategy will work pretty well. So when you first start this encounter, the enemies that are nearby, they're very far away from you, so you can sprint for a longer duration before you need to stop. You can then hug the left-hand side, and the enemies don't seem to spot you that well because you're looking off in other directions. I mean, there might be an enemy over there where I'm looking, but you just gotta crouch and just wait for him to pass, and then you're free to sprint over here. and then you need to go through this crawl space, and then there's going to be an enemy on your right. There's no telling where he's going to go. There are times when he can go off to the right, but then there are other times where he can come to you, or he can go off to the left. He's going off to the left right now, but I'm not going to kill him, because Ellie can't do stealth takedowns, as I've already explained, so I don't want to make noise, and I'm just going to get past him. There's going to be an enemy over here. There's a chance he won't be here. It's very random for this part, but it's randomness that makes it feel very interesting when you play it. And he's going to go off to the right. Make sure you have a bottle with you, because you'll need the bottle to distract two enemies coming up. And as long as you throw the bottle in the correct spot, you will have no trouble whatsoever in getting past these two enemies. So these two enemies are going to appear right in front of you. You need to wait for them to move a little bit so that you can throw the bottle in an area that's kind of behind them, so that they turn their backs to you. So right there is fine. I mean, I don't throw it near the window because there is another guy patrolling out there, and I don't want him to look in that direction because he might spot me as I'm coming out the window. And now I'm going to hug the left-hand side. He's off over there, but then there's also going to be an enemy right in front of me. It's very random what this enemy chooses to do. I get into a spot of bother because the enemy to my right gets very close to spotting me, so I'm going to have to kill this guy. And you can take his revolver if you want to. If you kill any enemy, you can take their weapon, but there's no point. So this is where I'm going to demonstrate the corner kill method. So because Ellie doesn't have to grab the enemies, she's able to just transition into a preset animation that the enemies cannot avoid unless there's geometry in the way, which could be very broken. And now we're just going to make a run for it, and that is the end of that little encounter, which is a lot of fun to speedrun. But now we have this encounter right here, which is incredibly buggy on the very first instance, because the cutscene that's meant to trigger this boss fight with David doesn't work on the remastered version. Every time I interact with this door, it will always cause Ellie to go backwards, and the dialogue will be playing, but David will be outside, and Ellie will not be engaging in any kind of tussle with David. So, watch this. I even tried to approach it slowly because I thought sprinting would cause this, but it turns out it's just something that they didn't bother fixing in the remastered version, because they expect you to restart the checkpoint, I bet. Either that, or they just didn't have enough time to fix the bug, or maybe this is a bug that cannot be fixed, which I don't understand how it cannot be fixed. If such a problem didn't exist in the PS3 version, then surely the remastered version shouldn't have this kind of issue. But what do I know? But we're doing the boss fight with David, and it's incredibly easy. He's way easier than Ellie from the second Last of Us. Ellie is a lot more challenging because she's more random with what she does, although I have found some really good methods for dealing with Ellie. And this strategy will work every single time against David, so you can use the plates on the second phase to move David over to this position so you can take him out. But be very careful because David, for some reason, has heightened senses. He can hear you while you're crouching, so you have to do the stealth attack before he has a chance to turn around. And if he initiates his melee attack, there's nothing you can do. It's a paired animation system. He will catch you regardless of what you do. Maybe you could put geometry in the way, but I doubt it'll work. Now, we're on the third phase, and I use the plates there to bring David over, because David is going to be a lot more stealthy. He's going to be crouching and taking cover, and you're able to use this mechanic to your advantage, because what I did is I used the plates to lure him over. I went over to that spot, and I think because I went over to that spot, it caused his AI to assume a hiding position quicker, so I could easily ambush him. And that was the end of the fight, and it's a really fun boss fight, and I really like the tone of that fight. You really feel like a kid being hunted down by a predator, and Serbian17 liked that section a lot when he was discussing it in his Tomb Raider walkthrough, and I agree with him. But we're not playing as Joel, and do not do the strategy right here. Use a smoke bomb. Throw the smoke bomb inside of this container when you see the two enemies inside, and they will never spot you because the smoke bombs are so overpowered on this game. Smoke bombs in the second Last of Us are completely useless, and they do not obstruct the enemy's visibility that well. They're so bad. I don't know what they were thinking when they designed the smoke bombs on that game. But the good news is their class is an upgrade, so I didn't have to deal with them whatsoever. But the strategy that I used just then is completely random. One of the enemies might potentially look over to where you are and they'll spot you, which is not what you want. Just use a smoke bomb and you will be fine. And I know I mentioned before that you need a smoke bomb for the Firefly section in Salt Lake City, but it's completely unnecessary. I was able to get it done without the need for a smoke bomb. So this is really the only part of the game where you need to use a smoke bomb, and it's the only part of the game that actually feels necessary. Every other moment, the smoke bomb could just be used as an optional thing. Maybe the smoke bomb could be useful for speedrun purposes, but I don't speedrun this game whatsoever. But once you get over to this door over here, that will be the end of this chapter. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.